There we go. Sometimes you just got to skip through some of that copyright-free music on YouTube to get something a little bit more upbeat. Good evening, everybody. It's Monday, January 18th, 2021. Or it's also December 39th, 2020, depending on how you're looking at it. My name is Mike Langford. I'm here at heylangford.com in DearBands. Welcome back to another episode of DearBands Live. We explore the paths and stories of career-minded artists and music industry professionals. Hopping pretty much straight into it today. I've had comments, people asking to just get to it. My guest tonight, Ep.17, Mr. Bill Miller, owner and operator of the Canadian West Coast company Sharp 9 Music, focusing on radio promotion and also the recent addition of producer management. Bill has a stellar track record of artists at radio, also a killer lineup of producers already. I told Bill before, this isn't a place for people to look for work. So, Bill, I'm not just bringing you on the show to try to join the roster. But I'm curious to hear him expand on kind of the relationship between radio promo and taking on producer roster as well. I do see him at the door, taking his shoes off Canadian way. Bill.
There he is, Mr. Mike Langford. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good to be hanging with you. It's been a while, and it's a pleasure to see you, man. Really
it has been a while. It's funny because like I feel like when we talk, it's like you have like 5-10 minutes to talk, and then like an hour goes by.
Yeah, well, you know me. I was like, how long is this going to be, Mike? Like anxiety's welling up, and then when you say hello, and it takes me 30 minutes just to get through our introductory, goodwill introduction. So, no,
it's good. Always a good and informative chat, especially with the way the radio music industry is going. I'm super happy to have you on this show. Full disclosure, I often ask Bill like in the morning on Monday if he can be on this show, and Bill's like, I need more advance. I think I at this point was like a week's notice.
I can do a week. I'm more of a week than a, hey man, are you feeling?
Hey, you want to hop online? So I'm happy to have you here. You have a background, or do you want to share a bit of your background in radio?
Sure. Starting with the radio promotion stuff, or
just kind of the important, like nothing important, but one of the things too is like how does someone get started in radio promotion?
All right. Well, look, I'll predate it just a little bit without being too overly verbose, because I think there'll be a thread that'll be interesting for people, perhaps. Okay. Because you'll get it in a second. I grew up in Windsor, Ontario. I'm based out of Vancouver now, and it was in the 80s. I'm 52, and our lives were going to see every conceivable rock and roll band that came through Detroit at Joe Louis Arena. Most of the shows were at the Joe, Cobo Hall, and man, it was just the greatest times, right? And the weirdness of the 80s, when we look back now, that was me, man, with the hair, like, I could have been the new member in Metallica, ready to go, man. I had to look ready to rock. And, so that was, and I studied guitar. And moving right along, I went to study music at Humber College. And I think that's important to sort of start with, because that was really the genesis of beginning to have open ears. And that's a really important thing in our business, is to try. We all have our things that we love, our passion, our tastes, our niches, our identifying the things that we really dig. But it's good, and generally good in business and in the arts, to try to have open ears, and when you're younger, typically you've got that angsty, like that, that sucks. And I was certainly like that. And so it was amazing that I fell in love with the music of John Coltrane and Miles Davis while still listening to Van Halen and Black Sabbath and Metallica and every conceivable Pink Floyd, all that great stuff. So that was really critical moment for me about, learning the language of music, the language of improvisation. It really kicked my ass. It threw me into a saturated environment with really great players, most of whom, almost virtually all of whom, were better and more talented than me. But I hung in there and I graduated. And after I graduated in 1992, I went back to Windsor for a very short period of time and didn't have a frickin' clue what I was going to do. I collaborated with a friend and a previous guitar teacher of mine, a really talented composer and guitarist named Christian Prokratic. And we sort of banded together and started a little project studio in his basement that actually, I should say, he already had sort of created this. And I just had some new nice, condenser mics and a bit of gear that I'd accumulated. So we got together, and it was a bizarre, we became like the go-to guys for death metal projects, man. Like from jazz, right? Like sort of like now I'm listening to, John Coltrane and Bill Evans, Open Ears, and now it's death metal. We're producing, quick little point. You may be familiar with a gentleman named Glenn Fricker. He's got a studio.
Yep.
He was one of our very first clients. The band, if I recall, was called Chaos with the K. So anyways, it was just funny. Like, how the hell does this happen? And then the thread is, part of what I want to communicate to anyone that's interested is, you never know, man. You never know on this weird and wild path of the arts and business and commerce and all these wacky things. And you were asking me, and that's why I want to show you some of the incremental stuff, because it becomes a big part of the story, this sort of inadvertent, snaking, opportunities that come from these relationships that you build along the way that you would never foresee. So moving along, Chris and I moved to Vancouver. Neither of us had ever been here. Christian had mentioned he wanted to get his master's in composition at UBC, and I just kind of was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do, man. So how about we just maybe, I'll hitch a ride. We did the proverbial, bought a full-size, brand new Dodge Ram extended van filled with gear, drove across Canada. The Blue Jays won the World Series. I believe we were back in tune when they actually won. It was all the weather was insane. It was a great trip, and we landed in Vancouver and started a project studio when there was more, the term project studio was more legit. We had 32 tracks of ADATs for any of those of you who know what ADATs are. We had the very first 32 channel Mackie mixing board that came from the United States in Canada. And it was from there, again, that's kind of an important piece, because that's how I met a lot of people. We came into a new city. We knew zero people. Well, we knew one person, a friend of Chris's, that he'd gone to the University of Windsor with a great vocalist named Leslie Walsh. And she put us up, and we're crashing her place. And we built a studio, and it was just such a blast that we put a lot of work into that. And we wanted to conquer Vancouver, right? We went to studios, we scoped everything, we'd go to trade shows, and just to get the lay of the land. And from there, what I'm getting at is how, we all know this, but how critical relationship building is. You can't expect to have opportunities in a vacuum, right? And so where I am today could never have been anticipated in terms of a career trajectory. Back then I had the hair down to my waist, right? Trying to be Steve Vai, that didn't work, not even close. But I could have passed for the, stand-in or something maybe back in the day. And it was good. I met, for example, Jonathan Simpkin of 604 Records through, doing stuff. And that was pre-604 Records, pre-Nickelback. And, Jonathan was just a brilliant, really interesting, somewhat eccentric guy. I really liked him, and he helped me out. And so to this day, I've been very grateful. And he played, quite a role in incremental successes where, you disappear for years. And then it's like, hey, man, whoa, blast from the past kind of thing. And then moving along, I won't stick with the studio stuff for too long. Interestingly enough, I had a friend that I went to Humber College with, named Sean Meehan, who had I guess, got a manager, a gentleman named John Dexter, who's based out of here. John is a world-class songwriter. He's written hits for Chicago and Loverboy. He wrote, I don't know if all of Biff Naked's first album or maybe the hits or a couple of the songs, not 100%, but, you know, just a succession of big time US, you know, big business stuff. And that was really kind of a real visceral, okay, what the F is this whole new thing? And so anyway, Sean had, at that time, was a management client because he had a rock band that he was trying to break called Chrome. And John was, you know, was doing a number of things. And that's where this idea of radio tracking came up. Sean was doing, sort of helping out, and they were looking for somebody to do, to be the quarterback and run the sort of radio promotion / radio tracking division of John's company called Pitbull Promotions. Still going strong, doing amazingly well. My colleague and friend Adrian Locke is running that. Adrian was with me back in the day also as well. And it was just a weird, I don't think I'd even heard the term radio tracking, right? And I'm sure my first interview was probably just the worst interview one could have ever given, right? And now I can laugh about it because I know enough I know exactly the kind of answers John was probably wanting to hear from me, and I was probably giving him the worst answers. Like, do you listen to the radio? No. No, but I do like Miles Davis, and, you know, Bitches Brew is a pretty cool record. And anyways, but I hung in there, and it was a weird thing. Like, what is this, right? No idea. And it's not rocket science in any regard. I think, you know, it's more about interpersonal relationship building skills and such. But I was on the hot seat, right? Like we often are, to figure it out, you know, sink or swim. So anyways, I've taken you through a giant swath of time, and it's been about 14 years. I eventually left Pitbull. I figured, hey, if I'm going to be in this entrepreneur-based type business, that, you know, the arts, if you will, may as well sink or swim, you know, of my own doing. And so I started out my Sharp 9 Music. I was incredibly fortunate and to be the benefactor and support, to be the benefactor and get the support of Jonathan Simpkin again, who hired me to do some projects. That my very first, I think, single was Faber Drive. That was a platinum band that had success on Universal, and I think my very first single there, it cracked top 20, which was pretty exceptional at the Hot AC format. Really created more legitimacy. And again, it's important to kind of take anyone that cares through these things, because you would never, ever be able to map this out. But time and time again, building those relationships and trying to be a decent, you know, honest person goes a long way, you know, integrity. And it was never about, you know, radio tracking. It was more like, okay, who is this guy? Can he pull this off? And then you're on the hot seat. So I've been doing the radio promo thing for, I'm going to say, about 14 years now in total, between Pitbull and my own company. And most in the last, I'm going to say 3 years or so, have created a producer management division of the company. And that's been something very, you know, exciting that I'm particularly passionate about. It's very synergistic with the radio promotion stuff I'm doing. And again, very unexpected, you know, how even that came to be. And I'm just incredibly honored and lucky to be repping some of the, I know this will sound hyperbolic and salesy, but the credits speak for themselves. I'm repping some of the very best talents in, I'm going to say, North America and the world, and absolutely Canada. And the credits speak for themselves. So don't take my word for it. And it's exciting. It's put me closer to the DNA of creating creative works and using the experience and what I've learned through the promotional elements to sort of fuse that all together. So deep breath, Mike. See, worried about how long I'm going to be talking.
Yeah, Bill was like, "How are we going to fill an hour?"
Minutes, your first sentence, man. Breathe.
I do want to go more in depth with bridging from radio promotion to the producer management. To step back for a second, I didn't know about the recording beginning. Why did you stop doing the recording side of things?
It's a tough.
Was it more engineering or was it producing as well?
It wasn't producing. Full disclosure, Chris was the talent. I just, I don't think I saw it quite that way, and that's why partnerships can be challenging. But Christian was the talent. When push came to shove, and that was pre-automation. There wasn't.
You were recording.
I was more, if I want to be honest about things now, I was partying and probably, maybe the sales guy, if I want to give myself some credit,
So you could bring him through the door.
I was pretty good at social interfacing, yes. And, but, when you look back, it's important to take stock and be honest. And Chris was the guy like yourself, an outstanding talent, engineering, mixing, all that stuff. There would have been nothing without, the talent-based thing. And that's why when we get back to the producer stuff, why that's so important, I wouldn't have been able to succeed in that. The recording thing, it's a tough business, man. I don't envy anyone. The models change now. I had sound tools, before there was a Pro Tools, right? Yep. It would take 40 minutes to quantize, normalize 1-2 track stereo master, right? We'd be sitting there and waiting, and but it was fun, but it's a very expensive thing, right? You get people kicking the tires, and we'd like to, we'd really like to do the bed tracks, on 2-inch tape. And it's like, all right, so what's your budget, man? Well, we got about $800. It's like, yeah, all right. Well, I'm going to draw you a map to the warehouse. That's Brian Adams' studio, fellas.
You want the 2-inch tape, but your budget says masking tape.
Yeah, so. There we go. That's a good one. I will be using that line. That's a great one. So it's tough because it's an exciting thing that there wasn't a world where there was native instruments, right? And Stephen Slate and drum replacement, right? So. And we'd all have all hands on the board, right, to do fader moves. And, it was still old school enough. We had great gear, but it was really about ears and ingenuity. And I think we made some pretty great records.
So you feel like you tried that and you're like, I like it, but this isn't the path I want to keep going down.
I don't think, if I want to be honest, that I would have had the skill set to be able to create it and if I said, look, I'm going on my own, I couldn't replicate the goods and services required to continue doing that. I think that's one honest scenario. So if I thought, hey, I want to be a producer, I don't think I would have, either I would have had to really, drill down, which would have been possible. I don't want to completely sell myself short, but I think it's fair to say I wasn't the sort of the critical talent in that equation. And so that's also another important learning lesson. Like, you can have partnerships that synergistically can be very powerful and potent. And it's one of those things where you generally don't want to repeat the same qualities, or else you're just replicating what the other guy can do.
Yeah, you need to augment.
But conversely, that also means a synergy that if things don't go, you can't keep it together, right? Can you reproduce those goods and services? And I don't think I would have been able to do it. And quite frankly, I don't envy anyone in the nature. It's like it's all of us that do this. We can talk about mic preamps and Neve strips, till the cows come home. I love that stuff. Plugins. I'm not an expert in this stuff, and even I find it exciting. I could talk about gear forever, and it's fun. And you can get very, mesmerized about, I need this and we need that. And it's endless cash going out. And the, running the is predicated on a little cash coming in here and there, and it's a tough equation. Specifically, I would even suggest these days, I'm sure you would know about this far more than I, but even the world-class recording studios. I don't know about the Warehouse or Armory Studios here or Noble Street in Toronto. I don't know what that business is looking like. I would think it's got to be tough because you're expected to maintain a facility at the highest spec, imaginable. It's massive amount of cash output. And yet somebody like yourself that's got the skill set, the vision, the ears, and the know-how can do mind-blowing things on your laptop. And so that whole disparity of like, I don't know, yeah, sure, recording in a room and room mics would be mind-blowingly fun and cool. And a la Jimmy Page, we love that. But most of the people these days aren't going to necessarily know with the tools in the hands of someone like yourself.
Well, there's two things I wanted to go off of that. As far as the bigger studios, I would say I don't think they're making a profit. I would go on the record to say that, because you look at what their overhead is and everything you need. I feel like there's probably something else backing it, or there's something else supporting it. And that's okay, because it's still like there's a lot of, and I would tie this thing to a lot of,
Mike? Are you suggesting drug money?
No, I'm not suggesting drug money, but I'm very much, but what I'm saying is I think there's a passionate investor. Yeah. There's someone that's like, I love this and I want to see this. And because we have a romantic element of recording.
Right.
And even with Jeff Dalziel, one of the producers on your roster, I remember being with him at Sony and telling him when I was getting the room in Kensington. I took over, it's Kensington Audio Media, but it's Kensington Sound. And he's just like, that's a lot of, like, why do you need that space? I'm like, well, when I bring bands in, they want to see this stuff. And he's like, what do you think my daughter sees when she walks into my studio? I'm like, well, she sees a recording studio, but if you're a 20-year-old band or a 30-year-old band, right, and not at that point, not a 10-year-old girl, it's like, you're seeing two different things.
Yeah.
And that was part of it, is that romantic element of feeling like you're going in, you're going to work. Yeah. And even when I moved my studio to the house, just moved to the office here, going to phase one and bringing a band there and just seeing how their eyes light up, just seeing this huge console and this big live room and all this. And they're just like, that's what they want to see, right, for their experience. And even that, I joke about even just having to get headphone sends up for people. It was like, everything was so much easier. Dejan Marno had him on a couple months ago as well. And he was the engineer there at the time. And it's just like, it was an awesome experience for everybody. But you're right. And the idea of what some potential interns at my old studio, 19 years old, playing me the reel, and I'm just like, this is really good. Yeah. Like, this is some really good, and you know where it can get to because the passion's there. So back to the bigger studios, like, I feel like there's someone that is passionate about it and they're kind of making sure the wheels can keep turning with them. But it's not practical. It's not practical at all to keep those giant rooms. And I think another 10, 15, 20 years, you might still have a few big studios, but if you look at what's on the charts and what's doing well on our streaming platforms, you're going to see more and more people that are just laptops and headphones.
Absolutely. And let me, and not to be a weirdo, but I was being flip. I mentioned drug money because I was trying to be funny, but that's actually it's not funny, and I just want to say because it's just not cool. I was just trying to be an idiot, but
I get it, because I sometimes don't ask questions.
Saying, like, how do you? I was riffing off the idea of like, yeah, like it's almost like if I won the lottery or if I made a fortune doing something, and this was a passion project, and you could absorb the costs to do something. There was a time where you could try to, compete in this marketplace niche, but it's so lean. The margins are so tough, right? And
yeah,
and I don't envy. It's like, and even with the project studio, there was a place, when I was there for what was a legitimate project studio. You know what I'm talking about with me? Yeah, there was a console, and it was a far cry from going into a world-class facility. But that was far more than saying, hey, I've got my Tascam 4-track, ready to blaze. So, but yet it was, again, the amount of effort to build the studio, the acoustic elements of it, doing it properly. Like, oh my Lord, it took, I think it took Chris and I over a year of, we were going to, here in BC, there was a place called Lumberland or whatever. I think it's no longer business, but it was like going every day to buy, Resilient channel and all this stuff, and this, like learning on the spot how to cut drywall, and, having a control room and a little live room and all of it. It was a great experience.
It was a different beast building those studios back then. Because like you needed the isolation. And even talk about some of the old gear. It's like how much heat and how much noise they gave off.
Right.
And now it's like you're at the mercy of your laptop fan. It's like just make sure that doesn't start taking off when you're doing stuff. But
right.
There's a good question / comment here. Cindy's saying the bigger you become as a producer, the bigger retail space you need to accommodate your clientele. Yes and no. And I would say it's more no, because like there's a lot of larger artists where they have a budget, and if they can afford a bigger studio and are more comfortable, they'll go and do that. But there hits a point where like you're not going to needlessly spend money, I think, these days, especially new bands coming up, because they're more in control and in the know of the expenses and the income. And it's easy to just tell somebody like, oh yeah, we'll just go and spend, $1,000 a day doing this. But when a modern band or artist is paying attention to their expenses, they'll go, maybe we don't need to do that. One of my favorite, to say with the producer side too, if you have your hit, if you make your insane amount of money, often I've seen producers build their dream studio and like that's their toy. So like they get this kind of studio that they want, but it's like if you don't need that huge space, that's one thing. But one of my favorite things from either last year or 2 years ago was Tool was working on their new record, and it looked like they were working on it in like a project studio. It was like an old beat up leather couch in the back, and they were just like listening to some stuff. And it's like, that's the reality of it these days, because the bigger you are, more established you are, especially in the production world, the artists aren't going to question how you get your results.
Right.
They're not going to be like, oh, well, I figured we go to a giant, studio with 72 channels of SSL and stuff like that. It's like, well, no, because this is how we get our results.
Absolutely. Well, I think Cindy makes a good point in the sense that when we say the bigger you become as a producer, right, you're meeting the requirements of your client. And speaking to what you just said, Mike, like generally speaking, if somebody's seeking you out, it's because they've heard the sonics and the creative vision of what you've been able to do for previous clients, and that's what they want.
Yeah.
So if you say we're going to record in our a barn, it's like, oh, okay, we're recording in a barn. That's going to be an experience, and that's fine, because they're looking to you. They've already signed on like that. Yeah. They know, they understand that. But speaking to Cindy's point, you would say it would depend on the client. You might say, yeah, we're going to need we're going to have to get Noble Street booked, and I'm going to need an engineer for this particular portion of tracking drums, where we could do it here, but it's probably more sensible. So that's true. But the world's your oyster in that regard then, and that you would be expected to size that all up, and
that's part of the gig. And again, a big part of it is the experience. But as you're saying, it's like when artists or bands, when they cross a certain threshold of trusting people in the music industry, and I'll say like especially with producers and mixers that price themselves too low. When you end up working, not say working, but you end up getting stuck with some clients that they're just going with you because you're the cheapest, to think that they can get what and it's like often they still don't trust your work that much. And it's just, I'd say definitely get yourself to a point where like you're pricing yourself competitively, but at the same time, you don't feel like you're on your dented can all the time discount with some of the acts.
Well, you know what? That's a great point to veer back into radio world for a second, because it's the same thing. Like independent radio promotion, right? You could start up a company tomorrow, like welcome aboard. How are you going to get the gigs though, right? That are going to allow you the opportunity to build the reputation and the track record that allows for that incremental improvement, such that you're going to work towards. It takes a long time. It took me a long time. And to some extent, I was fortunate because a lot of that was built in and baked in and predicated on the benefit of working with John Dexter's company, the credibility he had. So I became lucky as a byproduct of they knew John, not me. And it was just a question of, can you deliver? But it's the same thing. Producer, whatever, how do you get get to that sort of performance place where you can quantifiably demonstrate what you can do and start saying, hey, here's the cost, here's how it's going to be, whereas the dynamics not turned around on you, where you're scrambling to try and prove yourself endlessly to sometimes serious people, and sometimes jokers, and sometimes in a, less than winning formula. Quick shout out to our dear friend Nicole Hughes. I don't know if Nicole's listening in, but
I was chatting with her this aft.
Oh, wow.
A little bit. Yeah, I mentioned you were on today and she got excited.
I'm very happy to see you. I always get happy when I see Nicole. Has she been on your show? Because if not, then
I'm trying to get Nicole Hughes on the show, because I wanted the thing probably closer when we get to factor deadlines,
right?
Like a month away, so that people aren't trying to scramble to get their factor stuff together the night before. I'd love to have her on here to chat about some factor stuff, because wealth of knowledge when it comes to factor grants.
Story, right? Nicole as a performer, songwriter, it's the same damn thing, man. There we go. I would love to. I would be tuning in to the whole story. There we go.
Even if I wasn't doing this, I'd be tuning in to hear Nicole chat about her adventures in music, and it'd be interesting. Nicole said, just because she said too shy, I'm putting that out there. Maybe she meant touche. Maybe she meant touche.
Oh, there we go. We'll go with touche. And Nicole's partner, Chris Perry, another mind-blowing talent. Speaking of which, right? Like, great. Like,
I have plans for Chris.
All right.
On this as well, because we've chatted a couple conferences about certain things, and there's some things I'd like to have Chris on to chat about.
See, I'm everybody's agent, Mike. There you go. Right? Myself into everybody's business right here.
You're mentioning opportunities. Talking about how you got started in radio. Faber Drive, you said that was your first
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's like, how much networking and relationships had you already done for that moment to kind of happen? Because I feel like there's a lot of people that start recording or producing or managing or whatever, and they're kind of working with what is around, but to get something like Faber Drive, where you're like, no, this has legs already. There's already people behind it. Like, because in the recording world too, with a lot of bands, like, you're only as good as the last hit you had. Right. And it's like, that sounds like a pretty good piece to kind of use for jumping off point.
Well, for Faber, that was the first project under my own company, Sharp 9 Music, and that had been sort of built in. Sort of the pathway came from Pitbull. So again, you have to be honest and transparent. Like, I was thrown into this thing. I could have failed wildly. I managed to survive and figure stuff out, and it was sink or swim. But at that time, I was able to build a resume and credibility, and to gain the skill set of deliverables, and to be able to say, okay, I worked these records, at Pitbull for John and with Adrian, and so that became a discography and credits that allowed me to have that jumping off point. So with Jonathan as an example, he knew me for a long time. Now he'd been able to see working with, he knew that I was sort of the point person for the radio tracking stuff for John's company. And when I went on my own, he invested in giving me a shot to succeed with projects that were important to his business. And that, had he not done that, I'm sure I probably would have succeeded, but it sure went a long way to, really getting, starting off with a bang, and it meant a lot to me.
Well, so. How long did you know Jonathan Simkin before that project?
I'm trying to think. It would have been in, I'm going to say, probably mid 90s. So Christian and I hadn't been in Vancouver too long. We built the studio, and then we're out getting clients, and it was kind of funny. We wanted a producer agreement, or we were doing something. I forget what it was. We had one project that it was a licensing thing that got on a show called Nikita, whatever, and La Femme Nikita, I don't know, something like that. And it was, we needed a lawyer, and there was some kind of fanzine or something. I don't even know what it was. And there was an advertisement with Jonathan in there, but Jonathan explained to me that was just another example of someone he'd helped out, and that was their, trying to help him. He didn't take it out. But you're connecting these dots, right? Like, you see this, like, okay, I don't know anyone here, like, hey, dude, and we met him, and I just, Jonathan, I hope I say this in a responsible fashion, is, a somewhat of an eccentric character. And I just really enjoyed, I really enjoyed interacting with him. I thought he was clearly he was a very smart guy. And he, I think that was early on, very closely around all the Sarah McLachlan buzz, maybe shortly thereafter. I don't know, all that stuff. But yeah, again, just pure coincidence, right? Connecting dots in weird, unexpected ways. So he knew me. I went in and I had, Jonathan's wife actually is also a lawyer and was working with Jonathan at that point, and she took care of, I set up a limited company, so they did the bookkeeping. So there are little things and stuff of that nature was my direct interaction for, there. And then I didn't see him for years, right? And when I showed up one day at 604 Records with John Dexter and Adrian, he just kind of looked up and went, whoa, whoa, literally blast from the past, man, and I think John was like, hey, Bill, you just keep your mouth shut, green boy. Like this is, guys, John was like, wait, man, what's going on? What are you doing? You're doing radio? Oh, that's gotta be terrible. Wow. That was thanks. I'm just starting out here, but thanks for the forecast of grandeur.
Well, it's interesting because I try to pass along to bands and artists. It's like you don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know where someone's going to be. So it's like it's good to keep these relationships open. I think that's one of the upsides to something like Facebook. Yeah. It's like even something as simple as birthdays. It's like you can kind of keep people on your radar a little bit and see what they're doing and stuff. But the amount of times that even early on when I was producing and engineering, it's like you reach out to bands and they're just like don't really give you any time. Yeah. And you're just like, I'm showing interest in what you're doing, and I can tell by your engagement on MySpace that maybe not a lot of people care right now. So maybe listen to somebody who's reaching out, and they don't foster these relationships at all. Right. And even things like the conferences like Indie Week or CMW or North by Northeast, when it was more of a music thing, you could go places, you go to the conference, and like these people you're trying to email are there, right. And you can go at least get in their sight line, sure, and go and not necessarily network, but just like go say hi to people, even just nodding to someone that sure, to see them, and they just don't take advantage of these things. They just want to send an email and hope someone discovers them, and it's like. Right. No, you need to go. You need, as you're saying, like you have to get out and create these opportunities.
And it's not always easy.
It's not.
I'm pretty shy. I don't like being hey, nice to meet you. What's your name? My name's Bill. I do radio promo. It's like I don't. You have to. I think it's really critical. Coming to accept there's the things that we like and the things we don't like. Dexter would always use the term, people that just want to do the fun stuff. And I love that term. I use it all the time, right? Because there's things that are the fun stuff that we love, but it's not just about the fun stuff. And so networking, I don't like it either, man. It's the same thing, but what can I say? It's like it's in a business, and you got to go out and you've got to, in the same way, if you're going to push yourself to be a better drummer, if you're going to push yourself to be a better guitar player or improviser, you name it, then you've got to push yourself to be to improve your business acumen and to work on your weaknesses. And sometimes that means, sucking it up and just, and even if it's a more genteel kind of approach, when you're dealing with strangers, then just pick your spots and just try to, drum up a little dialogue and interaction. Yeah. Amazing who, CMW, legendary, right? You just hang at the bar. And if so
sage advice. That's what
you're talking to someone and you meet someone. Hey, Mike. And you're like, Bill, meet so-and-so. And it's like, oh, hey man, how's it going? And
the warm introduction. Yeah. That's why you go. Because right. you will know someone there. And right. Even if two people don't know somebody there, it's like you will see somebody. You will see somebody and bring them in and be able to chat. I was like my full disclosure, I'm a bit of an introvert. I'm not one to go and just chat with people. We were talking briefly, about hockey and stuff like that.
Right.
I have no problem talking to people in full hockey equipment or on the ice and stuff like that.
Right.
So I always have to think about venues and stuff.
I hear you're a bit of a chirper, in fact, that you're mouthing off.
I like to make sure my team
to be that guy.
My team's motivated.
Ace, I don't know. Leave it on the ice, I guess, right?
You got to do things. Make sure your team is focused and motivated. But with networking, I feel like networking is the first time you meet somebody. After that, you have an acquaintance, like you're either an acquaintance or like your friends. Like there's a relationship after that, but it's just that first time is networking and just get through that. Just like a cold email.
Right.
It's like, I don't like cold emails at all, but I understand that's just part of that's part of the process. If you don't have a warm introduction, it's just like, just write it and send it. Yep. They're going to want to know, what do you want? Who are you? And what do you want? And the same thing with networking. It's like, who are you? What do you do? And hopefully don't go into it just looking for work. Cause
I literally just had somebody email me and they referenced you introduced me at CMW. And I'm like,
okay, good. That's good.
Yeah. And we find out that, the musician was close to my cousin. And so we had a chat and it was like, oh my God, like now we're talking about all sorts of bizarre things. But when he first did the introduction, I had no name recognition, and he referenced, hey, Bill, we met at CMW. You may not remember me. I was with Mike Langford. He introduced us. I was like, oh, okay. Well, and with all due respect, I try to be a pretty decent person, but everyone's busy and you can't always, things fall in between the cracks, right? But he connected dots that compelled me like, oh, well, I'm just a complete, jerk. If Mike introduced me, I'm there and I like, I can't even be bothered. So that's an example. And we got on the phone and I'm glad we did. It was a great conversation.
That's what I mean. Like, that's how it works. It's like, if you don't go, you don't meet people. And like, you can get 50 emails a day, but that one interaction might be the difference between you actually getting a response or not.
Right.
And I've had bands in the past and like, I'm not hearing back from so-and-so or whatever. And I'm just like, come and I will introduce you.
Right.
And then you will get, the email will get returned. Like, I can't promise you that, but it significantly increases the chances.
Right.
I'm getting that back. I'm just trying to think. I don't want to go too far back because there's still some other things I wanted to talk about. But I did want to touch on for a second. It's interesting because like you did the recording thing and then like you decided to try other things. You've from what I got from it, you were being realistic and logistical about what you wanted to do music or career wise. And you were okay to just kind of put the recording stuff to bed and then move on to something else. I feel like not a lot of artists can do that. And it's like, it's a long look in the mirror for some people.
Sure.
To go like, how bad do I want this? Where I could do this and not achieve the level of success. And I think there's a lot of people in recording where I don't know if they're going to get to the level they want to, but they love it so much where I'm not going to say, don't do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's tough to say. Like I was consumed with, I still want to, I'd like to be able to play through, some jazz standards coherently at a high level, right? In every key and all that crazy stuff that you're taught at Humber. And to this day, I can't master, and I'm working on it. And so I was still, after the studio thing, I still had that dream, and it wasn't even focused with any kind of commercial sensibility. It was just a drive. I still wanted to be a better guitar player, and I wanted to do this stuff. So I took, like so many of us, I took, odd jobs, like no-brainer jobs that allowed me the ability to have the bandwidth to practice, right? Like I'd work at a storage warehouse where I could bring in my guitar, and say, okay, all the things you are, my God, come on, I'm going to try and get through this. Couple coherent choruses of soloing, and that was great. And it just kept me sort of in the mindset. And I think you're right. It's tough. You have to, the second you lose the mindset of something that you love, it's tough. It's really tough because I never set out. I don't think radio tracking is fun. I wish I could say I love it. I don't. I may be good at it. I may be passionate about representing artists and doing great work as best I can for my clients and the artists. That's more of an integrity driven thing. I've developed the skill set and the knowledge, and I've got the tools and experiences now that better enhance my ability to have results for my clients. But, you know, if that was I would have had to say, you know, it's not unlike being a salesman, to be totally honest with you, right? And I never set out to be a salesman. So by proxy, I'm in the music business, but the nuts and bolts of radio promotion is, I mean, it could be selling a lot of different things, I guess. And so you still have to find, speaking, I think, to what you're saying is there has to be, things can fall apart easily if there's not an innate sense of passion and love. And if you can find a way to manifest that and to keep that sort of burning, then you've still got the opportunity. Like, I wasn't cut out to be a great player. If that was my destiny, and I'm not trying to be humble and I'm not trying to be down on myself, but if that was my destiny, you'd know me as Bill, you know, the fusion, you know, jazz rock guitar player or something, right? And that's just not the case. And that's not a terrible thing. I've accomplished some things I'm proud of. I'm still working on them. But this other stuff fused together in a way that allowed me to still sort of be around creative people, allowed me to participate with them. And it's something I never would have been able to anticipate or plan for and do. And now furthermore, even with the producer stuff, it's even more integrated with great talents doing the same thing that you do for a living, which is making records with artists and interpreting and getting their creative vision, you know. And that's an exciting thing, because it's almost like full circle. It's brought me back a little bit closer to the DNA of the creative vision elements. And now I can bring some of the promotional marketing strands that are important. We all know that's part of the business. You know, I always say that, you know, art is for everyone. Art is not an exclusive club, right? Painting, pottery, music, you name it, right? Art is a beautiful thing that has so many amazing properties, right from the neural synapses firing and to you know, coordination and synchronization of your body, whether you're a drummer or a guitar player. It's an amazing thing, and it's for everyone. It's when art and commerce have to intersect that everything goes to hell. Not to say it has to go to hell, but it changes everything. That's where now the idea of creating and exploring becomes modified to the point of like, well, I want to make money selling my art. And that introduces new considerations, some of which are great and some of which aren't great, you know, and that's a whole new world. And that's the world I live in. And it's that sort of balancing act of trying to find, you know, beautiful art that fits and all this different stuff. So
I think you just created the perfect segue to get into some of the fun stuff.
Okay.
Here. I think it's boring to go like, you know, like, what do you look for in a song that you want to promote and track? Because I think the easy answer is just like, you know, it's a great song, the vocal's great, the hook's there, because it's easy to tick all those boxes. What are some of the things that are deal breakers with the song? If someone submits something, and you're just like, what are some of the deal breakers with production or a song that someone's pitching for radio?
Okay, so this is the most critical thing. I'm going to talk just about radio now. Okay, everyone's got to understand this. I'm just talking about radio. It's not the end all be all, right? So it's just this micro pinprick. You know, it's something that's important. It's sort of a gold standard. You know, it's a dinosaur metric, if you ask me, but it's still I don't mean that to sound disrespectful. It's a metric that's still recognized by agents and managers and labels, because we know how tough it is to go out. We all bang our heads, you know, endlessly, whether you're a major label, you know, radio promo rep like Steve Cody at Warner, or you're an indie guy. You don't, you know, you lose some, you pay your dues, you know, to do it. So I'm just talking about radio. The number one thing is, for me, it's, you know, you talked about production, but first off, it's a fit. Let's just start with that. And that ties into production. And this is where, again, this idea of the intersection of art and commerce becomes more complex, because you can have a beautiful, unbelievably unbridled creative work that's just not suitable for the very narrow bandwidth of what radio is about, right? That's an industry. We're talking about Bell Media and Rogers and Stingray. These are large conglomerate companies with mega millions worth of assets that they've invested in. So there's a lot at stake there, and there's no time to romanticize that it's just about, oh my God, look at that song, let's just play it, that's a nice song, let's try it out, you know. There's a song shortage today, you know.
There's never a shortage.
There's not a shortage, right? So it's about, it becomes competitive, and I don't like the arts to be competitive, but when we're talking about this kind of thing, unfortunately, it's very competitive. So again, it's about a fit. That's the first thing I listen to, right? Now, if I hear something where the production is substandard, and I guess I should acknowledge this. I kind of blow this off a lot. I assume because I'm working with great talents. I just saw Dan Davidson chime in here, and Dan's been one of my most successful clients that, you know, we've had, you know, I owe a lot to Dan, because he's, you know, we've had top 20s, gold record for an independent artist. It doesn't happen very often. And, you know, Dan wrote a hit with his collaborative partner, Clayton Bellamy, Jeff Dalzio, who I now manage. I didn't then, produced it. And there's all these things at the right song at the right time, and that was not an easy go. Like, there's resistance. But so anyways, I'm being convoluted, other than to say, if the sonics are off, that they don't belong on the air. So let me put it this way about production. We're competing to be played alongside the biggest hits in the world, right? So I don't care if it's rock or country or pop music. So if you expect that your music's going to be played alongside Billie Eilish or Drake, or at country, if it's going to be Keith Urban or Florida Georgia Line or Dan Davidson or the Roadhammers, or if it's rock and it's going to be Big Wreck, or take your pick, right? You know, Soundgarden, then there's not a lot of room for fall off in the quality and the expectation that production, you know, is at a level where the songs belong on the air next to those songs. There was a time, you know, decades back, where Canadian content had a bad reputation. It was kind of like, oh God, you know, just like crappy sounding, we got to play this stuff, right? And I wasn't there in the radio days, but it's probably legit, right? And going back then, we didn't have the nature of technology. There's been so much advancement. So I'm sure there was a lot of pretty lousy produced stuff being sent in on tapes, and quite frankly, didn't belong on there with hits produced at the highest level in Los Angeles, New York, or Nashville. And if it doesn't belong, it's not in the playground. I'm sorry. There's just no way around it. And so we do have to, like I said, I almost kind of just blow that off, because I assume, for me, it's like, well, if the production's not there, well, I can't even talk to, like, it's just not ready. It's not there. But that's, I think, glossing over too easily, and you've asked me about it. So yeah, if the quality, even just sonically, and production is far more than just sonics. It's about arrangement, musicality, instrumentation. It's about somebody that's listened to hits and understands the DNA of making hits, right? And synthesizing all of that in a way where we can deliver a master recording where we could say, okay, you can't say that sonically, you know, that the top end is dull or the bottom end is flubby or any of that stuff. You're not in the game. You're not even in the game at all. It's not going to happen. And you don't belong to be on the air of Bell Media, Rogers, Stingray, Patterson Group, and take your pick. So yeah, it's absolutely critical that we're delivering master recordings that belong next to the very best, productions in the world if we expect to be side by side with them. And then the caveat to that is from a stylistic standpoint, we're talking about a stylistic fit, right? So right now, I'll use country as an example. Country music, we call it hot country, right? This is a far cry from Charlie Pride and country, right? And so you can, there's times where it's almost like, man, this is like Kesha with a banjo strapped in the mix kind of thing, right? And say what you will, that's the nature of what's happening. I don't decide that. I just have to recognize that, it's not about whether I like it or don't like it. That's moot, immaterial, right? So you have to listen to what's being played. And I get this. This is like a critical thing that happens all the time is people will send me music that was clearly created in a vacuum, meaning they created something with not a single sense of it fitting or commercially slotting in for radio. And that's fine. Who cares? Other than after the fact, you're asking me what I can do with it. And the answer is nothing, because you didn't create it with any apparent sense of where it belongs. So if you're doing crazy, beautiful Celtic type playing and ornamentation, embellishments, might blow my mind, right? It's like Jean-Luc Ponty on the country song. I love this thing, or something like wild stuff, but it isn't going to get on the radio. So you've got to be very careful, right? That the fit, if that's part of the expectation from a marketing standpoint after the fact, if you're creating in a vacuum, you're looking for trouble. And that brings it back to full circle with the likes of a Chris Perry, a Jeff Dalziel, a Pete Lesperance, a Justin Cutting, a Ross Hayes-Sutrillo, all of us, a Mike Langford, a Dan Davidson, that if we're going to bring hits forward or bring songs forward to have any reasonable sense that they're going to work, you've got to have that sense of what that means, or you're not even in the game. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. And it ties into one, because I get asked the question from bands often enough, how to get on Spotify playlists or how to get on the radio. And it's like, I see and hear what they're doing. And I'm like, and I always refer to as genre sensitivity, where we talk about how the structure for certain genres or the sonics for certain genres or the themes, the song themes for certain genres and stuff. And I'm just like, this doesn't work with what's at radio. And then I'll get that response sometimes that, well, what's on radio sucks. And I'm like, well, why do you want to be on radio if you think it's not good? That's what's there to begin with. And and then sometimes, I don't want to dig a hole saying this, but sometimes it's like they'll end up with these feature spots on some stations.
Sure.
And I feel like when you talk about CanCon, and for the Americans that are listening to this, CanCon, there was a time, I don't know if it's still doing this, where so much of the content played on Canadian radio had to be Canadian based or Canadian artists. And so there's percentage that was there, but sometimes these bands will get on these feature spots on these stations, and I'll listen to it and I'll be like, really? But I get it. They got to play something kind of, homegrown or something local to fill this local spot. And again, I'm probably digging a hole here right now. But it's like they're missing some things that could make it more commercially viable, but they're fighting against certain things that are commercially viable. So I'm just like, why do you want to be on the radio? Because I think what you're going to have to stomach to make the music that's going to sit along this stuff on the radio, you don't really want to do that. You just want to say you're on the radio.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So it's one of those things, like I'm at a point now where I just kind of tell them, like, I wouldn't worry about this. If you're looking for radio, like, get a feature spot maybe, but
well, we all want to have our cake and eat it too, right? Like,
yeah,
you'd like to think that something that you're passionate about, you've poured your heart and soul, has the opportunity to reach people. And
I get that.
Vehicle for it to reach people, and it's exciting. It's an exciting thing, so people can blow it off, But at the end of the day, it's like, oh, well, okay, well then you can't have your cake and eat it too, man. You know?
It's the bigger. I guess what I'm saying is like the bigger picture of what a radio campaign can do if you're touring and you're
Right.
trying to get trying to get the story out for like a new record or new single, like there's more cogs in you know in the machine to like push things forward. But just to have something on the radio, it's just like if you just want to like tick the box or ring the bell sort of thing, it's like I get that, but I think you nailed it. It's just like just straight up some of the production and some of the sonics for things. And that's one of the things too, like with the bands that I play in, like that's what we're trying to compete with.
Sure.
You know, and that's the idea. Whether we get there or not, or whether the song reacts or not, that's beyond our control, but we feel like we're doing the best to try to get that. And I would say too, with bands and artists, like be real about your own ears, because just because you think it sounds good and 9 other people don't think it sounds that good, don't assume they're all wrong.
Sure.
You know, like when you find people again with your roster of producers, it's like you could probably send a song around to all of them, and I highly doubt that everyone wouldn't have the same answer of yes or no, because they all have ears.
Right.
You know, so when you get songs, this is a hard question. When you get songs and you think it's a no, or you think that there's not much you can do with it, how do you respond to that?
Well,
And also, I'd follow that up too. Like, if you think a song is really good, but the production's just not there, would you give them some notes on it, or is it just?
Well, it's tough because sometimes, if I want to be honest, it's very difficult to do a dissertation for everyone that's sending stuff, right? I do try though, and I think people, I know, I know that I probably spend more time answering people that there's no freaking way it's going to happen, because I kind of feel like there's a bit of a responsibility. If you want to, you want to do a little bit, then I don't mind if I can. I like to tell people, and I try to be, I don't want to, just dump on someone, right? It's, who am I, right? Like, big deal, some radio tracking guy. Like, so yeah, I've got a certain area of expertise, but I want to be encouraging while at the same time. So what I typically do is I try to be very honest and to present a mini tutorial without it being just super discouraging, like, this is trash. Like, are you kidding me? Question mark, ha ha ha, laugh out loud. I don't like, right, I would not do that. But you might feel, yeah, this is not even close. So for me, I typically would default to what we've talked about. Hey, let's, here's what I do. The nature of the business of radio is such that here's the, the competitive nature. And that way I can be honest, very completely honest about the challenges, such that I think I would have a very, I don't see myself, I would have an opportunity or a good chance to deliver the results that we would both hope to have together. And I always sort of preface that by saying, take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm not the all-knowing oracle of music or radio. It's an opinion. You can ask someone else. Maybe they have a more rosy, assessment of things. My assessment is that I don't see that you're ready to succeed, but it's not so personalized as so much as it's a reflection of, let me tell you a little bit why this isn't going to work, even if it was great, because ultimately it's not up to me.
No.
It's up to the bands, man. It's just not up to me to be their musical director. But if the productions, I will be honest, I'll say I don't think the production's where it needs to be, and I'll say that. But I try to keep it usually more on, like, you're asking me about radio, so let me give you a little bit of a lesson on radio and explain why I'm not taking it on, why you're not likely to have success no matter who might do radio or take your money, but I won't,
That was one of the things I wanted to mention too. Is just like, respect for being able to respond in a constructive way if you don't think something necessarily has legs, because one of the things that you've mentioned in other phone calls, it's like, there's no guarantees at radio. You can have a great song, sounds great, but it just doesn't seem to get traction. Yeah. And it's like, it's not on your shoulders. Sometimes it just doesn't come together.
Sure.
And you know how much work goes into it. And to be able to tell it to the bands, it's like, to give them some ideas of why they might need to go back to the board and figure a few things out. Because, like, if you really want to force something to radio, you will, and I'm talking to bands and artists, you will find someone to take your money.
Sure.
You will absolutely find someone to take your money. So it's good to have some trusted ears and again, friends in music that can kind of give you their honest opinion and know that it's coming from a good place and not just like, as you're saying, this is trash, you know, exclamation point, ha ha, lol.
Well, and I don't want to be an asshole. The reality is there's like in the arts, there's some degree of delusion. I'm sorry, it's just the truth, and that's where God bless everyone, because it goes back to my statement that art for everyone, and people can get excited, and you know, there's a vast range, and I don't want to sound like I'm marginalizing or criticizing people, and when I say delusion, I'm kind of being hypocritical, but I guess delusion sometimes it's like, okay, but do you think this belongs on the radio? Like, but you know, maybe that's unfair. Maybe that's just like, I've done this for long and I'm just being a jerk because I just have a baked in sense of like you can't possibly
that's
but there's a lot of people, and I don't like. I can joke with you here because we're not talking about anyone specifically, but I'm not out to hurt people's feelings, and I'm not out to make them feel shitty. And so I usually will have, like, here's a great way that I use this analogy for all the time. I'm a big sports guy. You're a sports guy. You know, again, it's the danger in this discussion is that we're talking about radio tracking right now, and that's just like, please, everyone's got to understand, if they watch this, we're just talking about radio. I'm not talking about other elements of the business. Okay, I'm responding about my little lane, my little path, right? When it comes to radio, you know, I like the sports analogy. It's a numbers game. Okay, so it's like you can be a first round draft pick, and you're like, or a second round draft pick, which means that the teams in the NHL, we'll use NHL, I'm a hockey fan, have identified that you're one of the best players in the world. You've probably been playing hockey at a very competitive level for your entire life, from maybe a toddler into your teens. And now you are sort of like, these are the guys that the pros, the scouting teams, have recognized as the potential very best players in the world, you know, that could be the new stars of the team. But you still have to make the team. You can be drafted in the first, second, or third round, but you've got to take somebody's job. Right? Now, I'm a Red Wings fan, but I'll use the Leafs because they're a better example, unfortunately for me, analogy, than my Wings right now, because maybe I could make the Red Wings. Okay, not banned from the fan group. Sorry, Wings fans. But using Leafs, you know, are you going to be taking Austin Matthews' job? Are you taking Mitch Marner's job? Who's like you? And radio's the same way. I'll use country as an example, just off the top. Are you taking Dean Brody, his job? Are you taking his spot, or Brett Kissel, or the people at the top of the heap? Are you leapfrogging them? So if we can understand the nature and the mechanisms of what radio means, a playlist has a fixed and certain amount of available playlist space that can be used at any given time for a certain amount of songs. X amount of it, the majority of it, will go to the biggest hits, as it should. In Canada, we have Canadian content, as you suggested. We're generally speaking 35% plus or minus, depending on certain CRTC license requirements. Generally speaking, around 35% are mandated to be Canadian. But even still, we're talking about the very best that Sony, Warner, and Universal are bringing to market to compete for that 35%. Okay, so there's a very limited amount of CanCon currents that are available to be played. So right off the bat, even if I get a song where I'm blown away, it's like, oh my God, and the production's mind-blowing. Maybe it's one of my guys that did the production, so I know it's mind-blowing. It's still, there's no magic wand that's going to take the elements in place where we have what's referred to as an unfamiliar artist. Okay, that's the big, mountain that has to be climbed, and that's not easily, it's not easy to ascend that, right? It's like You're unfamiliar to the listeners of a radio station where there's millions of dollars on the line. So this isn't just about music. It's saying, well, okay, you've delivered a great song. You've got a great team. I might be repping it. You could have a great producer that's dialed to production, but nothing's going to overcome this manner of how you're going to overcome and leapfrog what would be considered a core artist that's being played on a radio playlist, someone that is more familiar, someone whose brand development is further along, which means maybe they've been playing shows in soft seaters or stadiums, their sales, or maybe they're on a major label, maybe they're not. It's not just major labels, but all of that in totality, I call them pillars. If we look at them as there's various performance metric pillars, right, that are all in play where we're sizing up. For example, a colleague, a friend, and someone I've learned a great deal about, the VP of programming for KX96, Steve Cassay. I've learned a lot from him in particular, and he used this term investment, and I just ripped this off from him because I use it all the time now. But it's a great way of looking at it. You're asking radio stations to invest in you, right? So what are we investing in? So we all know what having a hit on the radio can do for our business, right? Agents, potential gigs, maybe you get signed, maybe you're easier to get a great manager. There's a lot of things that can be helped by having a hit when you have success, on the charts. But let's look at from the other vantage point. What are we bringing to the radio platform? Well, how are we advantaging their business, right? So the song's a given, man. Got to be great, or you're not in the game. The production's a given. If it's not like we said earlier, if it doesn't belong on the air, and if it can't stand side by side with the other hits, it doesn't belong beside the other hits, right? So that's the problem. It's a numbers game. There's a finite amount, a very small amount of playlist space that's available, and even when you deliver every single bit of it, this question still becomes, you've got to take someone else's spot that's likely further ahead of you. And how there's just no magic wand to do that. It happens occasionally. You have breakout hits, and we have Bell Future Star and Trending Track and One to Watch, these sort of initiatives that radio has more and more sort of, baked in as what they would see as their gateway to say, like, don't say we don't support emerging artists. I won't go down too far down that path. But, those are all these mechanisms that are very finite, and it's like, okay, that's like every 2 months they pick someone, and it's, it could be a major label project. So again, if you understand that, the key point of what I'm trying to articulate is that it's important to understand and become an expert in understanding the marketplace. And then you have a better way of going, yeah, right. How am I going to leapfrog someone? And what are the goals? And what are realistic expectations? And I could pay $50,000 to somebody to promote my song. But how is that still going to affect, these realities that are very concrete, these challenges, these roadblocks that everyone is up against? So if the artists think about their businesses as pillars, right? What's your live pillar? How many fans? What do your socials look like? Do you have any kind of sales? Is the song a smash? Is it produced by them at the highest level? If those pillars aren't all there and aren't all congruent and synergistic with each other, it's a pretty tough sell to think that you're going to easily take the spot from someone that has those pillars further developed in their brand.
Yeah, no, when you're talking about those spots, I always refer to them literally as parking spots. Be it live, again, like the value, because people, get on the case about like buy-ons for tours. I'm like, hey, those parking spots have value.
Right.
And the same thing with radio. It's just like, the parking spots on those playlists, they have value. And you're just saying, like, what's the value the artist or the band is bringing to the radio station? And again, if you're a band on tour, maybe the value is stopping by, doing an interview, doing an acoustic thing, ticket giveaway, merch, swag giveaway. There's all these things that add value to what's going on. And I think that's really great advice talking about the different pillars is bands and artists paying attention to the different areas to see how they're doing, how those metrics are doing, to help build their story and give evidence of like why this is on the up and up.
Right.
So, because there's only so many spots on the playlist, and you got to wait for excuse me, you got to wait for, sometimes there might be a bit of a lull to get in. And even with 10th Machine, my band, like back last spring, when the whole music industry was upside down for a second, figuring out what was going on, it's like we'd heard from our US radio team that like a lot of artists we're in active rock. A lot of artists were holding back their singles because they weren't sure their records were coming out, because they weren't sure they're going on tour now. So we saw it as an opportunity. It's like, well, we're not going on tour either, but for a new band, let's try to just shove something through and see if we can get some traction. Almost went top 40. But it was one of those calculated risks. It's like, when you talk about needing to take one of those spots, this might be a good opportunity to try to hop in there.
Sure.
Again, hoping everyone can keep their jobs, but at the same time, it was still an opportunity that way. I've had you over an hour now, Bill. I promised we would talk about the producer management, because you've gone through, you say 14 years of radio promotions.
Oh, just kidding. Sorry.
Pardon?
I said hell. I was just kidding.
So bridging the gap, because I wouldn't call it a transition from radio to producer management at this point, but just like I see there's one hand can kind of wash the other there, with what you've been building. So like what made you make that decision? Go, you know what, I'm going to reach out and throw an offer out with some of the producers, or was it the other way around where producers hey, can you just manage me?
It was the same thing we started with, Mike. It was, again, it was this, if you're not in the game some way and find a way, easier said than done, perhaps. Okay. But you've got to drill in some way and to just be unbelievably tenacious. And it's the only way you can develop credibility and reputations, where other incremental successes become possible. Right. So, I mentioned Dan Davidson. So I did radio promo for Dan's rock band called Tupelo Honey, a great, outstanding band, right? Just unbelievable. And the producer for Dan is Jeff Dalziel. And so that's the first time I heard that name, and it was just a name to me, and I'd never met Jeff, and I was like, oh, Dan hired me to do the project, and it was a great sounding song. It sounded like a monster, world-class US record. It was, that's the kind of projects you look for, and through that process, Dan eventually shifted in. He wanted to try something different. He wanted to take a crack at something else. And so he veered into a completely different lane, and it was country. But again, what was the common denominator? It was Jeff Dalziel, this alchemy of creative talent that had been the engine, with Dan's talent, right? It's a symbiotic thing. It takes both things. So you've got to have unbelievable talent, tenacity, intelligence, somebody that's smart, has their act together, which is all of what Dan is, and that can bring it. And then you've got somebody like Jeff, who, that I know that you worked with, and who worked at Sony, made many, many hit records at Sony, and gold and platinum records. And so now Jeff's DNA and his talents are fused together. And, all of a sudden we're having this country stuff. So the same team that were making the rock records are now making the country records. And so through that relationship, Jeff Dalziel, like, just again, the name, its name. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now I'm in Toronto for CMW. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm with Dan, so let's go to meet this Jeff guy. I want to say hi, and next thing you know, I'm there for 20 minutes, and it feels like we've been friends for 17 years. And that's a testament to probably one of the characteristics of why Jeff is a great producer. It's just a vibe thing. He makes people feel comfortable. You feel like you know him. And so we built a friendship there. And now I'm working with his client, and that was that. And I got a call one day from one of Jeff's dear friends and just a mind-blowing talent named Pete Lesperance. Now, Pete's also a producer, but also like one of the top, AAA session players in Canada for guitar. He's been doing a ton of stuff in country, dobro, electric, all of it, right? Like a mind-blowing talent, mixing and producing. And Pete reached out to me at sort of Jeff's suggestion out of the blue and said, hey, man, I feel kind of weird doing this, but I don't know. I feel weird even asking you, but would Jeff suggested that you should talk to Bill. Maybe, and I was like, huh? Like I was completely, oh, okay. And literally on that one phone call, I don't want to swear, but I'll say, screw it then, let's do it. Right. And that's that's what I'm saying. Like, how lean is that? Like, it's more circumstantial things, again, spokes. And then I literally called Jeff, I'm going to say about, 35 minutes later. And I said, dude, what? I guess I'm in business. And I was laughing and talking about something. And he said, well, I asked you to, why aren't you managing me? And I said, huh? And I think he indicated that he'd mentioned something like that. I probably just thought he was joking, right? Like a while back. I didn't. It's like, you asked me. Oh, okay. So I end up that afternoon. It's like, okay, I've got 2 producer management clients in the last 2 hours. There you have it. And what outstanding talents, right? Because I know I'm going to sound. I got to be careful because I don't want to sound like an infomercial. And I'm proud. And the pride is honest, authentic, and it resonates. So I want to be careful that it doesn't sound wanky and salesy and stuff, right? But ultimately, it comes back to the pillar thing, right? I don't, I'm not Bruce Allen, right? Like, you think of some of the greatest, folks out there that have been in that portion of businesses and built these careers. It really boils down to the talent, right? So then it's like radio tracking all over again. It's like, okay, what does this mean then? What do I have to do? How do I have to sort of augment what I'm thinking about? What do I need to learn? What do I need to figure out? How do I best serve and create opportunities now to create a foundation to recognize the goods and services, the unique talents, the skills, and the advantages of really exceptional talents in the marketplace that they can deliver? It's a reflection of their talent, right? So I've been lucky. This kind of came again through this sort of synergistic confluence of coincidence and relationships. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to you've got to be great or you're going to have a tough go. Right. And so all of a sudden in one day, I was repping 2 people to this day that I would put up as just world-class talents that I'll put up against anyone, anywhere. And from that creates yet another synergy. And next thing you know, it was Ross Hayes Sotrillo. And then Rob Wells, like, Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez, Ariana Grande, Olivia Newton-John, Cyndi Lauper. It's like, holy, oh, how do you say no to that? Where did you get my number, Rob? Somebody, my pal Liam Colleen apparently put in a good word. It's like, weird. Okay, yeah. Can I say no to Rob? No, I don't think I can. And then Justin Cutting and Spencer Sheen, both like great talents. And again, it's just sort of a synergy that comes from being honest, working hard, being humble, and always recognizing that not only do you need to get better, you've got to always push yourself to be better. Because if you're going to serve people like this, they deserve somebody that's honest. And I think if you bring honesty and integrity to the equation as best you can, you become the benefactor of I'm the one that stands to gain the most because I learned from all of them. So now I'm like in rock and roll university, right? I may be in the sort of nucleus of the hub, but the hub is really spokes that go out. And at the end of those spokes are world-class talents that have been developing their skill set, and their deliverables for years and years and decades before I was ever in an equation. They built their brands, they built their business, they paid their dues, and they became marketplace successes on their own. And so now it's another case of the right place at the right time and being able to interact with people to be able to make records that you're just so proud of doing. And it's exciting for me because it goes right back to the beginning of the conversation of moving to Vancouver and starting a studio, or even in Windsor, being the death metal, recording guys. That who would have guessed, right? And things just start to align. And now I've got some promotional expertise. I don't want to overtalk it. It is what it is. I've got a track record. I've got this very distinct and separate initiative. I don't like them to instantly be blended because it's not a racket. There's no scheme here. Either I'm just representing the best interests of my management clients. And sometimes that can be benefited. Sometimes there's potential radio people that will end up asking me and wanting to hire, and perhaps sometimes hiring the guys. That's never really the goal. I look at them as separate lanes, that sometimes interact. But we've got something that's pretty special. I'm very proud of it. And for me, it's probably the most exciting thing moving forward in what I'm doing, because like I said, it brings me right back to, let's make some records. We're all smart people. Let's just do our very best to be proud of the works we're doing and putting out there. You're not going to win them all. You're going to take shots, and you take your hits and you take your lumps. And if we have a better, equation of successes versus failures, then we're laughing. And so far, it's just been absolutely amazing.
It's awesome to hear. And I just the energy when you're talking about like this new branch / new chapter, and what you're able to bring to the table. Because you talk about bringing it full circle. It's like, you half joke about with the recording studio, like you were for the networking and building relationships, like things that you could bring to the table. And going forward to what I see, and you talk about being the hub and having the spokes of the producers around you. It's like, yeah, having someone like you represent them, like they know that you could go in and win the room and speak highly of people and and do a great job that way. One of the things that I see too these days, everyone on your roster, and correct me if I'm wrong, everyone's a killer musician and everyone's songwriter.
Yeah.
So like there's other hats that they're wearing. It's not just production. Yeah. It's not just recording. It's not just mixing. It's like there's these multiple hats that people need to wear these days.
Sure.
And also early on in 2020, after things started falling apart, like there was a few songs that the producers like joined together and recorded together and did the videos, and Jeff did drums for it. Rob Wells did some keys and stuff. It's like that's the roster being able to get some content together and be partially work, but also fun that everyone's able to do that.
It was exciting. That was Pete Lesperance's idea, and we called it the Sharp 9 Music Producer Series. And and everyone was trying to figure out what to do during COVID, right? When it hit.
Yeah.
We don't have the time now. We've got some more videos actually that will probably come out, but now everyone's so busy that who knows when that may or may not happen. But it was Pete's idea, and I just thought, again, it's like, it's Pete. It's a brilliant idea, but let's be honest, you're the one that has to do the heavy lifting. And we got it out there, and it was actually, I think, Rob came on board and just cranked out, the Journey cover, right? And it was unbelievable. Like, I think we had over 100,000. We had, like the views and all of it was outstanding, right? And it was just great. The spirit of it was just, man, there was no monetary thing. Like we talked about, do we release it? And I just said, look, guys, and not that we really debated this. It just came down to what is the R5 of this? We want to have fun. We've got some time, and we want to give something back without being grandiose about giving back. To encourage people to donate at that when all this was so weird and new. So there was no goal to monetize anything. This was just a reflection of talent. And all of the guys, like you noted, so there was the Sharp 9 Music Producer Series, because all of them were playing were the band. And that was the premise of it, was like these guys, like yourself, Mike, right? An outstanding drummer. You just don't often, people don't know, or they don't necessarily fully understand what you know, which is that in order to become great in this way, it doesn't happen by accident. And it's often this intersection of unbelievable dedication to learning an instrument, learning the language of music, learning the craft of songwriting, and then learning about recording, and then having interpersonal skills such that you're the person that can take challenging personalities in very challenging environments, and to be the conduit to keeping things on the rails when so often things are so easily willing to go off the rails. That's a lot of very finite skill sets, right? That's a lot of stuff. And I always say, go ahead and do it, man. Go ahead and do it. Go be a great drummer like Mike. Go be a great drummer like Dalziel. Go be a great guitar player like Pete Lesbrance, or bass player like Justin Cutting or Spencer or Ross, in their respective instruments. Go out there and write songs, run bands, be in bands, learn the craft, learn how to mix. Yeah, go walk in their footsteps, and then the world's your oyster, because it's just never that easy, right? So, and I'm fortunate, to be working with unbelievable talents that are humble, and I take great pride in being a slightly less humble when I talk about them, because there needs to be advocacy, because I think a lot of inherent talents don't feel, are queasy about self-talking. It's I know that you would fall into that category in a second, where you're trying to sell yourself. You just like, oh my God, you don't want to,
You hope the work speaks for itself, but we know that's not how it works. You do need to promote it. And it definitely helps if because word of mouth is what makes the difference.
Right.
Be it coming from a manager, or be coming from someone in your circle. It's just it does help have someone else kind of vouch for you and say, no, this person's really good at what they do. The quality's there. Because it's easy for a lot of people, and especially on the production side. And I would say too, is with some bands and artists, it's easy to say your stuff's awesome, but you need other people to say it's awesome. It's only worth so much when it's coming from you, sort of thing. So,
well, it's just we don't need to go down that path too far, but it's a space where the more that you do it, you recognize that there's a really critical space for great talent. So, and just to boil it down for anyone that's wondering what I'm talking, it's just to focus on the creative. That should be taking up the sole amount of your energy, not negotiating producer points and deal points and producer agreements and all the less fun stuff.
It's not fun.
But that's a space that I can do, and I can be very good at it. And in doing so, be able to help talents focus on making great hits. And that's how we all win, No,
I see the addition of the producer management. It's just a natural path. Because I think it's one thing to be working a song at radio, trying to get its success, but we know there's so many different avenues these days where you think if an artist has some legs, it might not work at radio, but there's lots of other markets it could work at. And it's you can bring that under the umbrella and then help push it to someone on your roster to help. So you're very much still helping the song have success, from even an earlier point at this, when it comes in. So
absolutely. Well, now the goal is part of, and I won't be long-winded about this other than say this year is going to be a very interesting year. I'm sort of not writing the ship. I'm navigating in a different direction, and it'll be an experiment. I don't know if it's going to work. My sense of the changing landscape of radio is such that I don't want to continue the model that I've been working in. I think the nature of constraints and changes that are happening in the commercial radio place are pretty visceral, and they're not good. They're going to make it even tougher. Let's just put it that way. If it was hard before, it's just my opinion. Again, grain of salt, it's going to get tougher. So I don't, in terms of being a service provider, Bill Miller, the radio promoter guy, I'm not bailing on that, but I'm going to try, I'm going to be experimenting to see, I want to give great music a shot to go into the marketplace and either get, slayed for all the standard reasons. We all get it. It's tough. That's okay. Can we give it a shot, but mitigate, the extent of costs that just were really starting to stress me out? Like it's like, wow, this is so expensive. I think of everything in guitars. You could have bought a Stratocaster for what you just hired me for, and oh my God, I feel, manifesting stress in things where I can't deliver. So part of what we're trying to do is I want to focus on, not exclusively artists that are working with the producers I manage. It's not that, but for those that are working with them, to give them an exclusive opportunity for us to take a shot at radio, for those that want to do it after I read them the riot act, like tell them like, the scariest thing. If they still want to do it after they've heard my spiel, then I want to mitigate the upfront costs to them and make it more of a performance-based thing. So if it goes, we have a hit on the charts, yeah, I deserve to be paid for that. That's cool. And everyone would be delighted to pay if it succeeds. And if it doesn't, then I'd rather say, look, this is part of the team that we're building, the fabric. You've invested in these great talents that are important to me, and I want to help to enable and facilitate an opportunity to mitigate some of those costs. I'm still not saying it's cheap. We're not talking $50, but it's not going to be like closer to $5,000, put it that way. And for me to still use the legacy of what I've got, the infrastructure, the relationships, and the platform to allow their music to have a shot in a way where if it's not going to work just as a function of the reality, like we're talking about the pillars and the reality, then it's okay, because you haven't, completely just burned money that I'm not convinced in today's marketplace that radio is necessarily the way to go. And I don't want to be very responsible not to suggest that my colleagues out there doing great work at radio promotion aren't worth every dime. I'm not saying that. I want to be very careful about that. It's not an undercutting thing. It's part of a team dynamic where I want to utilize my goods and services to particularly advantage our team. And in doing so, I'll probably be taking less outside clients. And we'll see how it goes. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's going to be an exciting year.
No, I think it's a good business model moving forward.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I know the business, so.
Well, it makes sense. It's again, and especially like rock radio in particular in Canada, it's like we keep losing stations.
Right.
We keep losing in one sense. They seem to go country on us.
Well,
but
just very quickly, and this is a little bit of a sales pitch. I'm working with a Saskatoon independent band called Weapons. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a trio from Saskatoon, 100%. The three guys, right? Jordan, Mick, and Tallis. It's as indie as you get. And we had a top 10 on the last single, Bye Baby Gone. It got to 8 on the charts. Like, it's like Metallica, Rolling Stones, Weapons, right? Like, so it can happen. I don't want to be so bleak to say nothing can ever happen, right?
It can happen, yeah.
We had this incredible success, and in fact, their previous singles did great as well. Like, I believe the other one was got to 11, was just outside of 10, and the one before that was, top 20. So it's like, wow, we've been having Weapons have, delivered great songs, and have sometimes, the right song at the right time. They got on the tour opening for Theory of a Dead Man, one of those pillars, right? That was one of the, right before COVID hit. The tour finished just before COVID. So they got their tour in. So that was one of those pillars that really helped out. Feldman was engaged at that time. They've now got a new agent that they're working with that's very excited about looking good. But anyways, 2 of the rock stations, the chart reporting active rock stations, have flipped formats. You alluded to one, 89X in Windsor, legendary station, is now flipped to the country format. And 106.7, the Drive-In Red Deer, Peter Michaels, a great, somebody I really love and amazing guy. And I think the brand is like hits of the, best hits of the 80s and 90s. And I don't want to sound that like I'm disparaging that flip. I'm sure, the company knows better than I. I'm just saying from my selfish vantage point, we've got a band that's just had successes, and 2 of our chart reporting investors, quoting Picasso again, are no longer there. And like, so that's and I'm only bringing this up as an example. It's a really definitive example that the marketplace is what it is, and you can't overvalue it. You can't over. I often say, look, man, it might be better to buy merch. Like that might be a better investment, you know, or get a new kit or whatever it might be, or ultimately, I usually say, I think that the gold is finding creative foils and collaborators that are the ones like yourself that are absolutely right there to affect the product itself. Because for all of the rings of promotion and marketing, they're important, they're critical, yes, yes, and yes. Nothing is more important than the actual product, right? So it's the people that are helping you to be the best at what you do. That's, to me, where the value is. And I'm repping great guys, but there's other great talent. So find a great talent. I'd rather you invest in finding and working with someone like that and having a shot for streaming opportunities and finding your sonic spot and helping someone, someone helping you to find your creative identity, than saying, hey, let's blow just ridiculous sums of money, to see what happens at radio. Because generally speaking, it's a precarious investment.
I don't think that's a good plan, just to see what happens at radio.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's probably a good place to kind of wrap things up here.
All right.
But before we're going to get on to hour 2 or 3.
That's right. I was worried about. I was complaining about.
You're like, are we going to fill an hour? I'm like, Bill, don't worry about it.
And I think you're looking at your watch like, gee, Bill, come on, you were bitching about 2 hours. Take a breath, man.
No, again, I always say, like, I'm hoping to have you back on here again later on in the year. Just because I'm being optimistic that things are going to get better by late summer and fall as far as getting back touring and stuff like that. Where can everyone find you? www.sharp9music.com. So SHRP, the number 9 music.com. That's it. You've got the contact form there. Bill@sharp9music.com. If you want to email me directly, there you go. For friends of Mike only, you can. That's the trick. Just say, yeah, Langford sent me. Yeah. Typically, if I don't see a familiar name, I generally don't answer the phone unless I know, because I'm typically busy. But if somebody tries, you can try leaving a voice message. And if it's coherent and reasonable, I may take my time to respond. And anybody or anything you wanna give shout out to, or you want to plug, or any projects? Well, I'm looking at my list of our friends, well, your friends. Nicole Hughes, thanks for a great show. I love Nicole. Ross Hayes, Citrillo, good advice, guys. Jeff Dalziel, my feelings are hurt. He's so busy, writing hits. Dan Davidson. No, man, it's a community. Mike, you're a great talent. It's been a pleasure to rep your music, and I'm not shining you up. That's the truth. You know how I feel. I appreciate it. Because we don't have a chance. You got to be great. That's the thing. Focus on being great. Worry less about radio tracking and the outer rings, and just focus and put every morsel of your energy and focus on just being great. That's how you stick out and cut through. As excellent advice. Bill, I'm just going to wrap things up here, and I'll just just hang out in the lobby, the lounge for a second. I'll have a beer in the lounge, Mike. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Bill. Okay. Thanks, man. See you in a minute. I'm glad that worked out. Bill was really concerned we weren't going to be able to fill 45 minutes tonight. Could hear him laughing in the hallway. Again, Bill Miller, Sharp 9 Music, radio promotion and producer management. I was really happy to hear Bill's plan when he talked about bringing the producers on, because it makes so much sense, because there's so many ways to get music out there and to promote it. And the idea of Bill having all his experience at radio, but we didn't really talk about it that much, but the idea of just playlisting these days and just ways of getting music out there and getting it heard. And just because your band's music might, or if you're an artist, your music might not fit on the radio, it doesn't mean you can't find places to get it heard. There's, I haven't checked the numbers, but there's 7 some odd billion people on this planet. A lot of them have cell phones and internet. There's a lot of places that people can get your music these days. Just because you might not be able to get it played in your hometown doesn't mean you might not be able to get it played in another part of the world and find some success. So I think it's a good path forward for someone like Bill that has that skill set with the networking and the relationships. And I would say too, like one of being a producer, one of my least favorite things to do is to talk some of the business side of things. I'd rather just get to, as Bill was saying, get to the creative element, and not have to be talking some of the nuts and bolts that make a deal work. So I can imagine that's a way of shoulder for people like Pete Lesperance or Jeff Dilziel and even Rob Wells. Like there's people having the team. It takes a team to really get things to the next level. So thanks again to Bill for joining us for well over 45 minutes tonight. I got some good lined up for next week. I don't want to give too much away, but it's difficult. It's difficult last year to tour, and this artist did an amazing job. Their band did an amazing job doing a Christmas tour, a virtual Christmas tour, and I really want to dig into some of the details on that, because last year was definitely difficult and trying, and to see how they pulled that off and brought all that stuff together, and just like what a band does moving forward, knowing that we can't tour. And this band in particular, their bread and butter's from touring. Difficult. All right, that is our time tonight. See, Zuckerberg's trying to kick us off here. Once again, this is Dear Bands Live, episode 17. Bill Miller, Sharp 9 Music. I'm Mike Langford from HeyLangford.com and Dear Bands. It kicked me out. Thanks for watching.